never slow up. No, I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I wouldn't think for a second that we're coming this way when I started with them. I don't think we're going up there to go over the mountain and ski. When she sees these scenes from above, she decides to separate from the group and go to the right to get away from here entirely. Some who didn't know her thought she was a beginner, not used to backcountry, and had given up. But this was actually a conscious terror, and she eventually separated from the group alone and quickly went out of their sight. She says that she'd been coming here since she was 3 years old. That day, for the first time, she suddenly felt that control and order here were not in her hands. She saw that all of them were very athletic, very smart, very skilled, professional, motivated, and well-equipped people, but something in her head wanted to tell them not to go, but she didn't and ran away. Radolf and the others, who are now 12 people, went a few hundred meters further. The girl who separated continued on the downhill path. One of them, named Castillo, says that when Radolf left, I turned to the girl next to me and said, "Megan, go behind that tree you see at the bend." She replied, "I'm not Megan, I'm Alice." They didn't know each other. He had mixed up the two girls. After she left, I saw her movements and her turns, and I remembered, but I know these movements. I've seen these in competitions. I recognized her by her movements. She also slid and went, following a path near Radolf's path, and went down. She was the second person in line. She says that when we reached a place with several hundred-year-old trees, I said, "This is a sign that this place is very safe." She went and stood next to those trees. The others also arrived one by one and stopped around the same area, on a nearly horizontal line, until that 53-year-old team, who we said were Jim Jack's neighbors the night before, slid through those trees, passing by them. Indeed, passing through their middle. He continued on the horizontal path towards the forest. This was one of the locals who learned to ski in the tunnel from his father, and he knew that the further down you go, the harder it gets to go to the sides. That's why he turned up here. He says, "When I passed by them, I thought to myself, this is no place to stop, especially with so many people. They shouldn't stop here," but I didn't tell them anything. I didn't really know them. I didn't want to cause trouble or make a fuss. So he went that way. Someone followed him. I will put some very, very good maps and explanations of these routes in the blog. It's very interesting to see them after listening to this podcast. Let's watch them too. The start of the avalanche was unlike any other natural event. Tornadoes, storms, lightning, these usually have signs before they occur. Strong winds, black clouds, whipping waves. But an avalanche gives no warning and, as we said before, usually starts by the victim's own hand. When you swim in the sea is alive. You feel it. But when you are in the mountains and skiing, the mountain is asleep. It seems to have no movement. You don't notice it. Jim Jack was not worried at all. He was having a great time with his experienced fellow skiers and important media and traditional figures. He had new skis. Carson, the photographer, says, "I reached Jim Jack and asked him, 'Sir, what's the plan here?' He says, 'It was my first time here, and the slope had gotten steeper, so I was a little worried.' He turned around and said, 'It's nothing, it's easy. We'll go out into that open plain, ski a little this way, a little that way, play around a bit, then come back into the trees.' I wrote it down and said, 'Cheers. Go have fun, and I'll watch from above, then follow you.' Then I saw him turn outwards, a little to the left, a little to the right. He was skiing in such a way that people walk on a sidewalk, very carefree and relaxed. Then he disappeared behind those trees. 5 other skiers who were standing further up say they watched. One of them says, when he passed us, we heard his voice saying, 'We,' like he was happy the fresh snow wasn't spraying everywhere and he was really enjoying himself. Then suddenly the snow changed without warning. It was as if the snow above Jim Jack had been released from a fountain, fell after him, and then he disappeared from sight. Not everyone saw this scene, of course. Those who did saw it in their peripheral vision and didn't fully understand what had happened. There was a few seconds of silence, and then they waited to hear a sound or a clue, but there was absolute silence. After a few seconds, one of them said, "Look over there," pointing to a tree much lower down, of which now only the tip was visible from the snow. He said, "I saw the tree move, something hit it and shook it, and I saw snow burst into the air around it, several meters lower." Those who had gone ahead each encountered the avalanche in their own way. Alice says, "I saw the avalanche coming. At first, I didn't believe it because we were in a very heavily treed area, and it was surprising to face an avalanche there. The only one who yelled was Radolf. He said, 'Alice, avalanche!' Alice quickly turned to the right to escape. She hadn't moved much when the avalanche reached her. It pulled her down with such force, like a wave hitting a rock. This was the moment we said she pulled her airbag cord, but she was so submerged under the snow that she didn't know if it had opened or not. She said, "It was like I had fallen into a washing machine. I couldn't tell up from down. I saw absolutely nothing." This snowy torrent passed by Castillo. Castillo was the one who said, "Based on my experience, I thought it was better to stand in front of a tree." He grabbed 2 trees with his hands and put his head between them, like a prisoner holding cell bars, and endured the pressure of the snow impacts for 16 seconds, holding himself tight. His face was being pressed against the tree bark, and his shoulders were being crushed. Some of the trees around him broke, and detached pieces came and hit his back. This avalanche, which was not considered very large, started with about 6,000 cubic meters of snow and likely carried another 7,000 cubic meters with it down the path. Its weight at the bottom was close to 5,000 tons. The trees Castillo embraced with his hands cracked and twisted severely but remained standing. Slowly, he felt the blizzard subside and gently lifted his head, then stood up. The camera on his head shows that for another 13 seconds, snow continued to slide beside and under him. There was also a sound, the cracking sound of tree wood. Then he turned and looked behind him, up where they had been standing a minute ago. Now no one was there. He didn't know when the avalanche started, or how it started, or how far down it went. The only thing he knew was that before, 10 or 12 people had been above him, and now they were coming down, and that from here to the bottom, there was still a 700-meter vertical distance. Slowly, terror gripped him. He started calling his friends names. All he heard was silence. Then he took out his beacon and set it to search mode, to receive signals from those who were likely buried and not to send a signal himself. Then he told himself, "I shouldn't be here because there's no telling what might come down from above. The snow is still flowing a little, and my beacon is in this mode, so if I get buried, no one can really find me." He thought about getting out of this valley he was in and going to the other side. Vang Hen and Pekka also had their beacons in search mode. They too saw no one and didn't know what had happened to the others. Pekka says, "I told myself there that if anyone is in these snows, their time is running out. The chance of survival for a buried person drops to 40% after an hour and to 25% after half an hour. That's why the first few minutes are very crucial." These 3 found each other. Pekka says, "I think they are here in this valley, under these snows." They asked each other's names. They made a couple of quick rounds in the valley and soon concluded that the fate of their companions was one of 2 things. Either they were trapped here in this valley by a tree, a wall of rock or something, and were buried, or the snow current had carried them several hundred meters further down. Now, if we waste too much time in the valley, we might lose the chance to save someone down below, and vice versa. Finally, they skied down. Pekka looked for his friend. He says, "I think he might be caught on top of a tree or something. But as I look further down, all the trees are bent, and the situation is truly worrying. Until, at some point on the path, I saw Jim Jack's skis caught on a 3 or 4 meter high tree. This was 7 minutes after the avalanche. Castillo, with his friend's skis on his shoulders, called 911. The 5 skiers who were supposed to follow Jim Jack up there had a very vague image of what was happening below. Snow that seemed loose and trees that seemed to be shaking. Hammond, who was the next person to descend, skied a little in the open area and then suddenly stopped. He says, "I saw that the fluffy snow suddenly ended, and in front of me, the ground suddenly dropped 2 meters, and the surface changed from that fluffy, fresh snow to an icy, watery surface just 1 step further. Then," he says, "I went towards the trees. As far as the eye could see, it was like this." He says, "When I reached this edge, I finally understood what had happened." From there, he shouted to the others, "Go into search mode." Then they came down. Everyone who saw this screamed, and from there, they took out their phones and called Jim Jack. The others also started calling other people. No one answered. Then one of the girls called 911. They hadn't found the group that was below yet. She reported the incident again, speaking very firmly and much better than the first one. She explained very well where they were and what had happened, and slowly the news spread. At 12:19 p.m., the gate at the top of the piece that leads to Tunnel Creek was closed. Now this group, who had all been standing together half an hour ago, had a 900-meter elevation difference between them. And no one knew how many of them were under the snow. One person stayed up there to look for Jim Jack because it was unlikely, but he might still be caught somewhere higher up. The others started going down and searched for signals with their beacons along the way. Carson, who stayed up, says, "I started talking to myself. Jim, are you here? Are you under my feet? Where are you? I'll find you." He says, "I talk loudly like this, partly to control my stress and partly because I thought he might actually hear me. And it's always in my head that ultimately, I'm the one who has to shovel and dig him out, because in my mind, he's still up here." Those who were further down went until they reached the bottom of the valley, where the rock walls of the mountain are 6 meters high. It's a place where in summer, when the snow melts, all these ice candles and ice walls turn into incredibly beautiful waterfalls. The terror there gradually increased. They gradually realized that they were looking for their friends and companions, and these images kept reconstructing in their minds. And they were realizing the immensity of the avalanche. They were still in its path. After a few minutes, Carson also shouted, "I'm coming down too. With this valley and the path I see here, no one is left up here." They came down until they reached a pile of fresh snow. It didn't seem like the snow was from a few minutes ago. It was there that they saw a ski pole sticking out of the ground. We also have a video of this scene, and you can see it. They saw the pole, took out their beacons, walked 50 paces towards the top of this snow pile. The signal kept getting stronger, and they became sure that someone was under here. They also found 2 gloves. Pekka says, "I told myself, if someone is fighting for their life, they must have their gloves on. So the fact that their gloves are separate is a very bad sign." Then I saw Mark's gloves and realized they belonged to Jim Jack. It took a minute for them to move around until the device's beep beep became very strong. And then it turned into a continuous beep, meaning they were probably standing right on top of him. He says, "When I gave the first shovel strike, it hit his arm. 2 of them started shoveling. They saw his face. His eyes were open. He wasn't breathing. One started artificial respiration. The other tried to find his body, but as they dug below his face, there was no body. Then they dug around and saw that he was curled up like a ball. His body and legs were above his head. I gave him a few breaths, but it seemed like there was no blood in his body. He wasn't wearing a hat. His jacket was pulled over his head, and his helmet wasn't with him. I went to press on his chest for resuscitation, and I saw that there was nothing in this body, meaning if I tried to exert force, he would fall apart. He says, "We are strong people, but there was nothing left of Jim Jack. I pulled his arm up. It was very loose. He was agitated. I pulled the other arm, I pulled his leg. The body was completely empty. Nothing was attached to anything. It was crushed. They turned off his beacon, laid him on the snow, closed his eyes, called 911 and reported it. They took out his phone. The phone was intact. He had 2 messages from his girlfriend asking, 'Where are you? Are you okay?' In the upper part of the plane, 7 meters away from them, in a place where they couldn't see her, Alice was silently waiting for help, unable to move. She didn't know how long she had been there, but her hands and feet were out, and in front of her head was a piece of ice that gave her a very small space to breathe. Her back was bent, and she was thinking about how many of them were trapped now and who was outside to rescue them. She took out her glove to try and poke a hole with her frozen finger in front of her. Then she covered herself again and finally screamed for help. For the first time after the avalanche, her voice came out. Pekka was the first to reach the bottom of the valley, where the rocks, snow, mud, trees, and everything the avalanche had carried with it were piled up. In the middle of this area, he suddenly started receiving a signal. He pushed his ski pole into the spot where he first heard the beep, then went back to find the source. After a short walk, he saw 2 pink gloves sticking out of the snow. He went closer and saw that yes, it was Alice. Her head was upside down, her feet were up, but I saw her hands and then her face. I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "Yes, I think I'm okay, but my leg hurts a lot." He says, "I shoveled for 5 minutes and finally, when the other 2 arrived, they saw that both of them were on their feet. Now they were sure that the others were probably around there, among the snow and rocks." After a while, with some confusion in the group about who was doing what, Michelson started managing the situation. He divided people into different groups, and each group hit something that wasn't snow, indicating another person was there. They started digging. This time, the back became visible first. His head was bent into the ground, his hat was pushed back and filled with snow. His limbs were dislocated and twisted. When they turned his head to see if they could perform CPR, they saw that he was cold. All this time, he had been a few steps away from Alice, but he probably died very quickly. This is how others were found. They used beacons and dug them out. Digging is not like clearing snow from in front of a house. There are large, hard pieces of ice in the way, as if they were glued together like concrete. One person scrapes and shaves. A few minutes later, they get tired. 2 people have to clear the snow, then start over. In short, they repeated this process until they reached the victim, Chris Radolf. It was very difficult to pull him out. His face was stuck to the ground in a frozen frame and was completely bruised. It took a few minutes to pull his leg, which was very deep in the snow, out, and finally, they pulled him out. At 12:40 p.m., Alice called 911 and reported the situation. They encouraged her from the other end to continue searching and digging, saying that help was on the way. She asked if they had sent a helicopter. They said no. Because of the avalanche danger, helicopters couldn't fly. They were forced to continue first aid themselves. They performed CPR for half an hour, and then everyone accepted that he was also dead. Those who were a few meters higher and performing CPR on Brennan also accepted after half an hour that he was dead. Slowly, a few more skiers appeared, but there was no news of rescue forces. Erin, the same girl who had separated from them at the top of the path when she saw where they were going and what they were doing, returned and rejoined the remnants of the group down here. She was a local and knew everyone. She says that while they were pulling Radolf's body out, she held his head in her lap and said, "This is Radolf, the knight of Safa Stevens, a very popular boy." Tiffany, Jim Jack's girlfriend, was sitting in a bar in town. The conversation turned to how they went to Tunnel Creek. Someone said, "I heard there was an avalanche there." The bartender was distorting a story. Tiffany said, "I want to be polite and not interrupt his story, but ever since someone said avalanche, my heart has been pounding." She quickly drank her drink because she felt she needed it. She asked for her lunch to be boxed and came down the slope, took the elevator, and went up. It was like taking the longest elevator in the universe. On the way, she says she saw a friend who, as soon as she saw her, came and took her hand in a sympathetic and comforting way, and she understood that bad news was waiting for her up there. She reached the first aid room and saw Radolf's girlfriend there. She had been skiing all morning and was at lunch when she heard about the avalanche and came up to see what was happening. She came up and saw them with their beacons, moving around and whispering, and finally, they told her that Radolf was also dead. At the exact moment they told her this, Tiffany walked through the door. Brennan's wife, from the other side, recounts that she saw the head of security and asked him if anyone was injured. He said yes. She asked if anyone was killed. He said yes. She asked, "Where is Brennan?" He said, "I haven't heard anything." From that moment until she heard her husband had died, she sat on her phone, constantly dropping her water bottle, trembling, and unable to control herself. Then the head of security came and took her to another room. The man says, "I didn't know what I wanted to tell her, but I knew what I had to say." The woman herself says, "When they gave me the news, I felt as if I died on the spot and then was reborn into a nightmare. It's not right, Johnny. I died here. Take this CPR in a nightmare. You yourself say, from my perspective, I died. That's how I should say it. This, every other day that I am in this, I die. I die. On the other side of the mountain, at the bottom of the valley, the survivors gathered around the three bodies covered with jackets. Those who didn't know each other introduced themselves. The first rescue team arrived at 1:05 p.m., 70 minutes after the mountain fell. By the time they arrived, there was no longer any help to be given. When they arrived, they realized that the people they were looking for were not amateurs, novices, or strangers. Some of them were their own friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. The examination conducted there showed that the cause of Jim Jack S. death was a head injury and internal bleeding, in addition to a ruptured aorta, a broken neck, crushed ribs, and as we said, his internal organs were completely destroyed. The diagnosis for the other two was roughly the same. The conclusion was that all three likely died upon impact with the avalanche or very soon after. The survivors were told to ski down to where an ambulance would be waiting to take them to the center. Another team would come to retrieve the bodies. It was a bit hard for them to leave the bodies and go. On the other hand, they also felt some guilt. It's commonly said that an avalanche doesn't just kill those it buries, it also takes the lives of others. Everyone from that moment began to think about their own fault in this incident. The locals thought perhaps bringing some famous strangers here to show them the place led to this. Some recalled the Weather Center's report, which they perhaps didn't take seriously enough or interpreted incorrectly. Some remembered the stop signs they ignored along the way, or even that if they hadn't wasted time up there after the avalanche and had come down sooner, they might have saved more people. And most importantly, they wondered how so many intelligent and skilled people made these consecutive mistakes. This incident was neither the deadliest avalanche that year in the U.S., nor the most fatal incident in the history of Tunnel Creek. But there are scenes and images that repeat at the end of all such incidents. These are not pleasant scenes. Jim Jack was placed somewhat reasonably in a sled with a blanket and rope to bring him down. But when they reached Brennan and Radolf's bodies, they said there was no clean and easy way to transport them. They wrapped them in ropes and dragged them down from the same spot. Jim Jack was with a blanket and rope, as you heard in this part. This was episode 11 of the Canal B podcast. The Canal B podcast is produced by me, Ali Bandari, with the help of Namlik. In the coming days, the entire map, animation, video, and audio file about this story will be uploaded to the Canal B blog. We will also share it on Facebook and Twitter. I won't explain too much here so as not to spoil it, but be sure to check it out. The collection of materials that the New York Times team gathered and presented for this article, and the way they presented them, is truly unparalleled. Follow the Canal B Podcast blog on Facebook, Twitter, and Telegram with the ID Channel B Podcast to stay informed about new episodes and to receive additional and supplementary materials about this story and stories that have been told before. Channel B Podcast, the Canal B Podcast blog on Facebook, the podcast blog.